name is Dr. Bear Lefkowitz, and I'm the director of the Association of Jewish Refugees Refugee Voices Archive. Yesterday, on the 24th of June 2021, we marked the newly created Holocaust Survivors Day in an online event. I feel that it is wonderful to have a day to celebrate the lives of all Holocaust survivors and to acknowledge their post-war efforts and achievements. This is, of course, a cause very close to the Association of Jewish Refugees, which was founded in 1941 to support the needs of the refugees and survivors, which it is still doing today. The Refugee Voices Archive also celebrates the lives of the refugees and survivors, as from our first interviews in 2003, we did not only want to focus on the Holocaust experiences, but on the whole lives of the men and women we interviewed. I'd like to share with you the recording of our panel discussion with 3 of our Refugee Voices interviewees who survived as very young children and were all liberated in the Theresienstadt ghetto, more accurately described as a transit camp and labor camp. Let me introduce you to our speakers. Badashoni was born 1937 in Szeged in Hungary, where her father was a lawyer and her mother a chemist. In 1942, her father was sent to do forced labor, and the rest of the family were put into the Szeged ghetto and then deported to a labor camp in Strasshof. And then at the end of the war to Theresienstadt, where they were liberated by the Soviet forces. Marie came to Britain in 1956 as a refugee from Hungary and became a pharmacist. Jackie Young was born Jonas Spiegel in Vienna in 1941, and at the age of 9 months, he was deported from a Jewish orphanage to Theresienstadt. After liberation in 1945, he was brought with a group of children who survived to Bulldogs Bank in Sussex and later moved to Weir Courtney in Lingfield, Surrey. He was adopted by a couple who kept his origins from him, and Jackie discovered his true background in 1963 when planning to get married. Jackie enjoyed his work as a black cab driver for nearly 46 years. Dr. Martin Stern was born in the Netherlands in 1938 to a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother after they had fled Nazi Germany. Aged 5, he was arrested by Dutch helpers of the Nazis and with his 1-year-old sister Erika incarcerated in the Dutch transit camp Westerbork and then in Theresienstadt, where the 2 survived thanks to the help of a Dutch woman. Martin and his sister arrived in the UK in 1948 to join their aunt in Manchester. He studied medicine and became an immunologist and hospital doctor. Thank you very much again to Marie, Jackie, and Martin for talking to me yesterday. And the first question I asked the panel was what they thought about the newly created Holocaust Survivors Day and if we needed another day in our calendars.
It's a very good idea. It brings it back into our memory, all the things that we don't think about all the time.
Okay. What about you, Jackie?
It's not a bad idea. Hopefully some other people out there may agree with the situation. That's about it.
You think it's a good thing just to have another day to celebrate, or?
Yeah. It's not a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. And Martin, what do you think?
Martin's muted.
Oh.
Well, my first reaction was one of horror. We have Yom HaShoah, we have Holocaust Memorial Day, and we have Tisha B'Av. If it were up to me, I would make Tisha B'Av sufficient for all the disasters that have befallen the Jewish people throughout the ages. Our identity in Judaism is not and should not be defined by our enemies, by the Nazis. And the wallowing in the suffering of the past is a danger, is a trap. This is not what our Jewish identity is about. But when I come back to what Jonathan Orenstein said, it was not his intention that that should be the purpose. His purpose was positive, and that I completely endorse. It's very important to realize that there are so many wonderful positive things about Jewishness and about Jewish identity and about all the beliefs and the culture that are associated with Jews. So I think, you know, provided we make it something different from the other days and make it something positive, that I endorse.
It's a difficult challenge, isn't it? Because by declaring something a Holocaust Survivors Day, you categorize people as Holocaust survivors. So it's difficult not to talk about it. So, you know, it's going to be interesting how this is going to pan out. Anyway, and also whether, you know, what the themes he was discussing about resilience and the next generation, you know, how, you know, can we talk about that in terms of survivors? Because obviously not everyone was resilient, not everyone, I mean, people are affected in many different ways. So that's how I see it. I think it's slightly a danger of sort of almost glorifying survivors. That's just I'm throwing that in.
I don't know if I'm right, but my impression and belief is that every Holocaust survivor has suffered from depression. The difference is just between people who admit it and people who conceal it. I have found that when I talk to Holocaust survivors who have led very successful lives, who've become very prominent people and who are wonderful people to have a conversation with or any sort of relationship with, you would think their lives have gone swimmingly. When the subject of depression crops up, they are awfully knowledgeable. And they understand it in a way that nobody who hasn't suffered from it would understand it. And in my experience, usually they have absolutely wonderful spouses. It varies, of course, but so yes, there is a huge negative side. I mean, I wouldn't recommend our experiences to anybody. And nobody would want their children to go through what any of the three of us have gone through. For goodness sake, of course not. It's terrible. On the other hand, think of our little mates in the prison camps who didn't make it, who ended up in the crematoria and went up in smoke. I mean, in my experience, they were wonderful people. They were wonderful little boys in my case. And compared to them, you know, we should bless the fact that we're alive and that we're able to do something.
Thank you, Martin. Let's come to that. That's an interesting topic, the topic of depression. Let's come back to it, I think, at the end. The question I wanted to ask all of you, of course, when conducting interviews with child survivors, the first question which comes to mind is, of course, how much do you remember and how much were you told about your experiences? And you were all very young. Jackie was the youngest, being 9 months. So, you know, my question is, you know, what do you remember? What fragments do you remember and what were you told? Maybe again, let's start with Marie, please.
That's very interesting because I remember very little. And I have been with my mother right through the various camps and in Terezin as well. And when we came out, my mother completely shut away everything from her mind and didn't tell me anything. So for years and years, because of this, because she was so in such a terrible state about it, she wouldn't tell me anything. So my very faint recollection is just a few things that really hurt me, like the smells, or being in a lorry or in a train shut in with lots and lots of people. When it really hurt me, I remember those little things, but the important big picture I didn't have for years, not until later on when I have seen films or heard things, but my family protected me, and I think my mother protected herself by not telling me anything about the horrors of it. But personally, I don't have many memories, not of the important things.
So there are
Only
sort of
the horrible things.
fragments. You have got fragments.
Yes, very much so.
Mhm.
That's all I can remember of the past, really, the fragments.
And other fragments of places. I mean, you were liberated at Terezin. Is there?
Yes, I remember the Russians coming in and throwing down chocolates and sweets, and how hungry I was, and we were grabbing everything just to eat because we had very little food at the time. And whenever I see a train going past, one of these trains where they have cattle in them, I remember how awful those trains were. That really upsets me terrible. But not many more memories.
So the difference is, of course, you were with your mother. Both Jackie and Martin were
Yes.
parents.
I also had my grandparents with us. We had the whole family group. I remember my grandmother stealing a carrot for me because I hated so this soup, this watery soup that we had all the time. And when I had a carrot, that was a wonderful occasion. I could eat it. She stole it from the kitchens where she had to work. I only remember little things like that.
And you said before you found your memory has changed over the years.
Yes.
In which way?
Sorry?
In which way?
Say it again, ask
In
me
which
again.
way? Sorry, in which way has the memory changed?
How did it stay with me?
Or how did it change? Yeah.
How did it change? I am so sorry, I didn't hear that. Well, I have seen films and I have seen the real horror of these various places. And then it really got to me what happened and how lucky I am that I'm here, that I have a good life. I had a good life, a nice family, and that perhaps so easily could have just not happened. That struck me as a possibility.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you. Jackie, now maybe to you. In your case, you have no memories, or are there any fragments of memory?
Memory started when I arrived in the UK. I have no memories at all of Theresienstadt, even though I was there for 2 years, 8 months from a 9-month-old baby. So I'm a total disadvantage to Martin and Maria. I was going to show you a photo, maybe you've seen it before, but anyway, this is when I arrived with a bomber. Can you see it?
Hold it down a bit. This is when you arrived in England.
Haven't changed a bit, have I? Anyway, and yes, like you said, Bear, I got 3 major notifications of my being in the UK, which really turned my life round a bit. Once finding out from a child in school that I was adopted, my parents were very loving adopted parents, but very hostile to learning about my past or telling me anything about my past. There was a total conspiracy of silence with her friends, her family, so I had no knowledge. And then one day I went down to my adopted grandmother, and she informed me that I wasn't English, that I was Austrian. And I thought she was out of a cotton picking head. Anyway, so by 21, just about to get married, I had to prove to the Jewish Board of Guardians or somewhere in Bloomsbury that I'm Jewish and I'm going to get married in a synagogue. And to get married in a synagogue, I had the proof. Well, my mother just wouldn't give her she had the papers to prove that my Viennese mother was Jewish. I pleaded, and eventually she had to go to the Chancery Lane silver vaults where she had the papers. That's how much she decided to make sure I wasn't going to see any papers. And that the person in charge saw the paper said, your son can get married in the synagogue. I snatched the papers away, and that's when I found out that I'd been in Theresienstadt for 2 years, 8 months. Total blackout of the whole situation. As I say, I didn't know about anything. My memory started in a place called Bulldogs Bank. I'll show you another photo. And there's me at the head of the table, and a few of, we were the 6 of us, but only 5 in this photo. Sadly, one got ill. I don't know if, can you see it?
Yeah, hold it up a bit. Yeah, we can see it.
I'm at the head of the table with not a happy face, but there you go. They told me, the 2 German ladies who were looking after us said that they had to put sugar on everything we ate, otherwise we wouldn't eat it. And for one of the better words, we were a nightmare. For a year, we were one hell of, I think one of us would have been a nightmare, and they had to put up with 6 from the start. So,
I mean, Jackie, the group of you, I mean, for anyone who watched the film, The Windermere Children, the group of you is in it, the group of very, very young children, and you were one of the 6 young children.
yeah, we were walking in the woods with the teacher, and a dog startled us, and apparently we ran into the woods away from the dog.
I mean, Jackie, when I interviewed you, and when I hear your story, what is to me so almost unbelievable is that for 1 year, everything was documented, you know, in Bulldogs Bank by the Anna Freud Center, and then you were adopted, and then there was no contact with you. I mean, I find that unbelievable, and that it takes you so long to find out. And then you see all these photos and the documentation. I mean, that is an extraordinary story.
The library has a file on us, which apparently cannot be opened until 2046 and possibly even 2076, which actually outlines what we said, what we did, and how we behaved. And I'm glad I didn't have to look after me.
And did you find out why your parents were so against, your adopted parents, against you finding out about your past?
It was their problem, not my problem. Alice Goldberg, who was the matron of the second place we went to, which was called Weir Courtney, advised them to, if she could, share and help them along. And their words were, no, we'd rather do it ourselves, which was a big mistake, because I was, for want of a better word, a very big hot potato. And they didn't know how to handle me. They were, I mean, all parents have a learning curve. My parents didn't start anywhere, really. They showered me, they loved me, I loved them, but they did not understand the fact that I lost a family in Vienna, and they weren't going to tell me anything about that background, which was a shame. That really put a little bit of a wedge between my mother and my father, both loving parents, but they couldn't handle my past. One was called Annie, and the other one was called Ralph. Terrific guys, but they couldn't handle it.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for sharing this. Martin, now talking about your memories, and again, I remember our interview, and remarkably, you remember a Red Cross visit in Terezin.
Yes, there were several of such visits. I don't know, the one that I remember must have been very late on, but I don't know the exact date. But I was in a building which the Nazis had given a German name, the Hamburg barracks, Kaserne, and the lady looking after my sister and I seemed to have a kind of somewhat privileged position, and with a small number of other women, we slept in a little side room off the back of a big women's dormitory. And I was prepared for the Red Cross visit, and I said to the other women in the dormitory that I wanted to tell them about how we lived there, and they very fiercely told me not to say anything, not to do anything, not to touch them, just to sit there quietly. They were very scared that I might do something of that sort. It would have had terrible consequences for them. Of course, during the beautification episode in Theresienstadt, when it was made into a Potemkin village for the benefit of Red Cross visit, most of the people who were involved, who played a major part in doing that, were sent to Auschwitz in the couple of days after the Red Cross visit. So their fear was highly justified. But I can remember Red Cross officers and some German officers coming into this little side room off the back of the big dormitory. And if I had just, sitting where I was, reached out my arm, I could have just about touched their coats, which were coarse wool, olive green. I've never seen that in a book or any other account. That is purely from my memory. So anybody who's able to check that is very welcome. But it was very real. So indeed, yes. But which of the Red Cross visits it was, I don't know. I think it was one that occurred very late, and I'm not sure how well documented it is in other respects.
I mean, that's very interesting, Martin, because what we found in many interviews, that it's not only age related, what somebody can remember. I mean, you have two people who are 6 or 7, and one person can remember something and the other person doesn't. And it's remarkable. You're not the only one. We have some other interviewees who can remember, you know, being in hiding when they were 5 or 6 or 7, you know, which seems a remarkable thing that you have these detailed memories. Tell us a little bit, Martin, about the Dutch woman who took care of you in Theresienstadt.
Well, she wasn't a Jew. She was from a nice Catholic family in Amsterdam. She married. The guy she married was a market trader, working class. He was a Jew. She was imprisoned in Theresienstadt for having married a Jew.
And she found you and your sister. Why did she look for you?
Well, I had no idea at the time. I mean, everything that happened was bizarre. So I had got beyond asking questions. I just got used to things being bizarre. But during a visit to her in the 1980s, I asked her, you know, you picked me from amongst maybe 50 little boys in a building where I found myself amongst a whole lot of little boys. You could have picked one of the others. You picked me. And you went to a different place and you picked my sister, who was 4 years younger than me, a little toddler. And from amongst a whole lot of little babies and toddlers, you picked her. Why did you do that? And the answer was that she and her husband had been childless. That troubled her a great deal. And in Theresienstadt, where people were mostly concerned about space in this terribly overcrowded place, about food, people were dying from a combination of malnutrition and disease. And most of all, people lived in fear that their name would appear on a list to be on the next train out. And people had a pretty good suspicion about what happened to the people who went onto those trains. And in those circumstances, most people think of number one. You know, they think of themselves. It's very understandable. And this woman wanted to look after some children. And she went to the Judenrat, the so-called Jewish council, the perverted Nazi sense of humor. These guys had no power to counsel anybody, least of all a Nazi. They just followed orders. They were slaves. They were just doing administrative work as slaves for the Nazis. But she went there, and one of these men told her, there's a train coming tomorrow from the Netherlands. She was from Amsterdam. There are 2 children on that train whose father killed 2 German soldiers. Why don't you take them? And the story, which I have also got from a separate source in the Netherlands, who didn't know this woman and probably never met her, is that my father was hidden on a farm near Amsterdam airport. Part of the building is still there. It's a private house now, but it's a tiny plot of farmland. And during the war, it had been the home of a farmer and his family. The farmer's name was Hannes Bogaert. So it's the Dutch pronunciation of, if you know the film star Dirk Bogarde, it's the same name, just pronounced and spelt in the Dutch way. And he and his family were devoutly religious Christians, Protestants, and believed it was their duty to help Jews. And they hid on their tiny farm, and it's hard to imagine when you go there and look at it, up to 70, according to a book about it, which I've got here. I didn't get it in preparation for this thing because I didn't know you were going to ask me. But this is a little book in Dutch about the family. Up to 70 Jews at any one time. I mean, under the floor, in the haystack, in garden, in farm sheds, and in the ditches. And when they knew a raid was coming, they would send the Jews off to hide in the ditches because it's flat as a pancake. Mm-hmm. The only way you can hide other than in a building is in ditches. It's a long story, but my father was hidden there, sent on to another farm, which was also raided by the Nazis. Incidentally, the first farmer and his son both died in concentration camps for their trouble in hiding Jews. Anyway, how this story got to today's start, I have no idea, nor did she. But she was told this story, and that's why she picked me out from one place and my sister from another place. So my father, who eventually died in Buchenwald on the 25th of March, 1945, according to the records, and I don't know how he died, he's just recorded there as having died on that day. Died obviously under horrific circumstances. I mean, he had been in Auschwitz, so he would have been on a death march or in an open coal truck in winter. Both of those methods of transport were absolutely horrific beyond imagination. And he would have died under the most horrific circumstances, not knowing that what he had done had played a vital part in saving the lives of his two children. So, long answer to a short question.
Yeah. His action saved you. Thank you, Martin, for sharing. You all have in common not only your survival, but also the disruption of family life post-war. Moving to a new country, in Marie's case as a refugee from Hungary, in Martin's case, who joined the family in the UK, and Jackie's case being brought to the UK as a group with a group of child survivors. Can you tell us a little bit how you feel, what exactly happened post-war? Jackie, we heard about it already, and how it affected you later in life. Marie, I know that you didn't stay with your mother, so tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I was brought up really with my grandparents until the age of 14 because my mother had to work. My father died in a labor camp in Russia, so my mother had to be the breadwinner. That's why my grandparents were bringing me up. And when I was 14, then I joined my mother. And when I was 18, I really had enough and I wanted a different life. That's why I tried to come out somewhere. And I ended up in England with the help of this very nice English lady. And from then on, everything is just good and better and better and better because after studying, I met my husband. And we have got two children, and both of them turned out very, very good and very loving. And what I really wanted, a loving family, and I got that. And now I have got 9 grandchildren, and I'm so proud of my family and my grandchildren. The oldest granddaughter just became a doctor last week. So I can't ask for anything better, and I'm very proud. And I think that all those horrible people, if they look down from up there to see what we achieved, they can be very upset. It is good. Everything is good apart from the whole, well, what this infection around us is now a problem, but hopefully that will pass, and life is good.
And after the war, when you said you grew up with your grandparents, what was it like for you? Did you understand that you couldn't be with your mother, or did you want to be with your mother, or was that okay for you?
I didn't really understand very much because nobody was speaking about, not even about being Jewish. My mother forbade my grandparents even to tell me that I'm Jewish. It was not a topic, and she was just so upset about everything that, so I wasn't told. I went to a state school where there was no religion, and I brought up without religion. It really only, Jewishness only started to get to me when I came to England. And I got Jewish friends, and I realized that I feel so much better among a Jewish friends in a Jewish society. I married a Jewish husband, and from then on, everything has just flowered, and it became so different.
In a
But
way, Marie,
my Jewish education only started in my grown-up time.
but Marie, that was typical, wasn't it, of a lot of Jewish survivors in communist countries. I know my mother, who was in Slovakia, it was very
Yes.
similar. They were too scared to admit they're Jewish. They were faced with some anti-Semitism. It was a very difficult time.
Absolutely. It didn't touch me personally, I must admit, but it did touch the family. And they were frightened all the time.
So it's interesting because also you experienced not like Jackie's silence, but a kind of silence about the past.
Yes, there was.
Yeah. And Martin, what about your situation post-war? You came back to Amsterdam and you couldn't stay with this Mrs. de Jong, who saved you.
That's right. We were snatched from her flat the day after our arrival by the family that had looked after my sister during the war, at risk to their lives. One can understand why they wanted my sister back, but they essentially denied this poor woman access to us afterwards, which was terrible. It broke her heart, and it broke mine too. But they housed my sister, but they felt they couldn't house me. They were living in a very nice semi-detached house in a lovely village, I mean a prosperous village, and a commuter type of village, really. And so they sent me back to the woman who had hidden me with her husband during the war. The husband, incidentally, was murdered in Neuengamme concentration camp for his trouble. And I loved her, and I continued to love her to her last day of life. She died about 10 years ago. But then I was moved from there to another family, the son and daughter-in-law of the family that had my sister. So I was with complete strangers. They knew I wasn't meant to stay with them permanently. So my construction is they understandably didn't want to form an attachment with me because they knew I was temporary. So it was a hard life. And then I was moved eventually to the family that had my sister. They had now moved into their enormous villa, and now they felt they had a little room for me up in the attic, in the roof space, really. And subsequently in a nice small little room on the first floor. Although all of the family were perfectly okay towards me, except one, and that was the woman of the family, who was she was a sort of pathological feminist before feminism was as fashionable as it is now. She wanted a daughter, which is why she had my sister in the house. She didn't want another son. She'd already had 4 and dressed the 4th as a girl. So he became the laughing stock of the village. And I was there just as an accessory to my sister. And it was made very obvious, you know, when they went on holiday, they left me behind. They took my sister and so on. I mean, I lay in bed crying at night. And incidentally, when I was with the son and daughter-in-law of that family in Amsterdam, I had developed, at first I got on okay at school. I mean, at first it was very strange because I wasn't used to being with children. It took me some months to behave normally. And fortunately, the other children in the class behaved very normally towards me and eased that transition. But I then found myself in a class where there was a disabled boy who was being horrifically persecuted by the other children who mobbed him. I mean, the whole class, except for me, was teasing him and bullying him. And I wish I could say I was the hero and, you know, stepped in front of him and, you know, done something heroic, but I didn't. But I couldn't join in the bullying either. I stayed in the background and I didn't like playing with my classmates after that. But I became friends with some boys playing in the street, got on fine. And one day they said, it's a festival today. Do you want to come with us? Well, I hadn't a clue what they were talking about. But they took me into the local synagogue. It turned out they were Jewish. And it was Purim, and there was a sukkah at the back of the synagogue. And there, a girl, maybe about 16 years old, sat us down and told us a story. And I was so impressed with all this that I went home to this couple I was not comfortable with and said I wanted to be brought up as a Jew. And over dinner, the husband explained to me very seriously that if I did that, then after my death, I would burn in eternal hellfire. That family sent me to Christian Sunday school, a very good one as it happened. I learned a lot, which I still value today, but it was Christian. And when I and my sister moved to England, to my blood relatives, my Jewish family, we considered ourselves Christians. And my uncle didn't, you know, I think was not comfortable with having these 2 Christian children in his nice Jewish family. And that was apparent in his behavior. It took me until I was in my 50s, long after my aunt and uncle had died, to sheepishly walk up the steps of the synagogue, and I've been going ever since. The Jewish religion is my religion, although halachically I'm not a Jew. My mother wasn't Jewish, and I married a non-Jewish woman in the meantime, so I couldn't convert to Orthodox Judaism. And although my wife has meanwhile died, that's still the situation now. But the Jewish religion is a very serious matter to me. That's a little vignette of also the families that looked after me. I mean, they didn't talk about my past, and they never asked me. It isn't that they didn't want to talk about the war. They did. They talked about it all the time. They talked about what had happened to them. But in some respects, my experience was very similar to Marie's and Jackie's.
It also shows the sort of, I think, arbitrariness of being thrown from one family to the other without anyone checking on in anything, you know, and that's just from today's perspective so unbelievable that happened. Thank you, Martin. But Jackie, I wanted to ask you, you told us that your adopted parents didn't talk about. What do you think helped you to come to terms with what you then found out later about your... We can't hear you, you're muted. You're muted, Jackie. You need to unmute yourself. Yeah.
I think I really came to terms with the help of my wife. She's been really, you could say, the solid ground of my past, and she's pushed me and prodded me into the right places, and helped me when I was sad and helped me when I was happy. And without her, I've said many times, I probably wouldn't be talking to you today. She's one great lady. That's about it. I was going to show you some other photos of me, of the places.
Come on, then.
Right, we're going to show you the first place. Is it right?
Yeah.
This is the first place in Sussex called Baldock's Bank. I used to have the bedroom up here on the terrace, and I used to look out. We were high up on the downs, and we used to look out to the Sussex, and I couldn't understand why I could see stars on the ground. And I found out that they were the little houses in the village below. And the second place was where you can see the children, the older children playing. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And this was for Weir Courtney, which was also this was given to by Sir Joshua Drage, who was a furniture man who had a big furniture place in Holborn. And he had this lovely country home that he gave to us for a while. I only stayed there for a few months before I was fostered by my people who eventually adopted me.
And Jackie, when you found these photos of yourself, do they bring back the memories, the photos of Weir Courtney and Baldock's Bank?
No. What came back to me, all these places that I've shown you now, came back in my dreams. I used to dream, tell my mother, my adopted mother, why am I dreaming these buildings, whatever, and particularly Weir Courtney, because I could, like, say, I could walk through the whole place now like it was yesterday, and it just came in my dreams. And I used to ask my parents, why do I keep getting these dreams? But they weren't forthcoming, so they were just dreams, until one day, just prior to our wedding, we went down to a place, found it by some amazing detective work, and I walked into my dreams. And I was invited by these two lovely people who had two lovely girls, and they showed us all around. It was a dip into the past. It was wonderful. I was also going to show you what I got from Prague. This is the actual piece of paper that shows my name, Jonas Spiegel, tells me when I was deported. And I got from the ITS, which is the International Tracing Service. That was actually the Geheimstaatspolizei, the Gestapo.
SD, yeah.
That found me in the orphanage in.
And is it important for you to see this black and white in a document?
Yes, it's the. It's the proof.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you very much for sharing this. We have just a little bit time left. So the last question I wanted to ask all of you, what would you say to your young selves from today's perspective, after liberation, to your very young self? What would you say to yourself, Marie?
Oh, I don't know. I think I would have liked to be able to speak with my mother about all the things that happened. And of course, it's not possible now. She died 15 years ago. But I feel that I missed out on a lot of things of her knowledge of our past. That's all, really.
Thank you. And Jackie?
Well, I'm still waiting for some photo of my family. I've really, that's my major stone in my shoe, which won't come out. I just can't, because I've closest I've got to my mother is my belly button, basically. I've got proof of when she was born in Vienna, Elsa, my mother. And I'd love to get a picture of my family, because for whatever reason, my father, my mother, when she put registered my birth in Vienna, she omitted to put my father. So I have only one side of the family, no side of my father. He may have been assimilated Jew, and for whatever, and he was. I shouldn't have really been born in Vienna at that time. It was almost 42. The war had been on for over nearly 2 years, and how she managed to get me born in a Rothschild hospital in Vienna is amazing, amazing. She must have been some woman.
Thank you, Jackie. And Martin, what about you?
Nobody, no human being can predict the future. And just in the same way as extraordinarily and incomprehensibly bad things happen, in the same way, extraordinarily good things happen. When you least expect them, from a direction where you least expect them. There's no denying that my life has been so difficult. I mean, I had a close friend and colleague who committed suicide, you know, another consultant in the same hospital in my specialty. Throughout my life, people have come out of the woodwork, as it were, who are so good and so amazing that I find it completely incomprehensible, just as incomprehensible as the bad things. And so also for other people who go through incredibly difficult periods of life, and this is common, of course. You don't have to be at the receiving end of the Holocaust to go through difficult episodes in life. Hang on in there, because there are good things that happen and you can't predict them. And you've no right to expect them, but they occur anyway. That's, and you know, for any of us, courage is not an optional extra. Courage is an essential of life for everybody, for you, for me, for everybody I've ever met. You just need it, and you need to recognize that and to be courageous, and good things will happen as well as bad things.
Thank you, Martin. I think Jackie wants to add something. Yes, please. You have to unmute yourself, Jackie, please. Unmute. I can ask you to unmute, and then maybe that will work. Okay, in the meantime, Jackie will, no, you're still unmuted. You need to unmute. We have a little bit of time for questions. So if you want to ask questions to the panelists or to me or to anyone, please, either you can put them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and I can try to unmute you. Jackie, no luck with unmuting? You can write a message if you something you want to say and I can read it out.
Jackie, you have to click on the microphone symbol.
Yes, the left symbol. Anyone who would like to ask a question? Maybe let me just go back to, somebody said something at the beginning about Holocaust Survivors Day, that whether refugees are included. And of course the answer is I'm sure they are included. And it's an interesting question whether refugees are survivors, but I think at this point in time, everyone is considered a Holocaust survivor. So that's the answer to that question. I have a question here from Alison. And the question is, how do you feel when people call you lucky? Jackie, I'm sorry, I can't ask you because we can't hear your answers. I'll ask Marie first. How do you feel when people call you lucky?
I think I must be lucky for being here, for being alive. That is luck, and to have a loving family and a country that has accepted me, I must be lucky.
Thank you. Martin?
Well, I would reject that word for two very important reasons. One is religious. We don't understand the purposes and the actions of the Almighty. God forbid that I should think that the Almighty saved me because I was better than the others, because I know I was not. They were terrific kids. They were better than me. Don't question it. They were. We don't understand the reason, but to call it luck is grates on me religiously. But there is another very important reason. I survived because of extraordinary things done by human beings around me. It wasn't luck. Two of them died. My father and the man who had hidden me for 2 years, 5 minutes walk from where Anne Frank was hidden, by the way. He died in Buchenwald. I can't call that luck. The Nazis publicized that anybody who hid a Jew would be treated like one. And I counted as a Jew for the Nazis. I absolutely reject that. Of course, yes, surviving is incomparably better than dying. I'm very grateful for it, and I'm very pleased that it happened. But luck in the sense that it was random chance or something like that, I utterly reject.
Thank you, Martin. I think that the issue at luck is whether somebody tells you you were lucky or whether a survivor or refugee uses the word themselves. Like my mother, for example, in her interview, she always says it was a question of miracle. 3 miracles happened, otherwise she wouldn't have survived. So, you know, I think it is how people see it themselves and whether somebody else tells you.
I can understand that very well. I mean, somebody who's not been through this doesn't understand how one piece of good fortune was not enough to save your life. You had to have the one and another and another and another to survive. If I had not been arrested very late in the Second World War, I wouldn't have survived. You know, if I could name a dozen things, without any one of them, I would not have survived. So in that sense, I understand your argument extremely well. But there's another respect which makes me totally reject it.
Thank you, Martin. So unfortunately, we can't hear Jackie, but Jackie says that it was his Austrian mother's birthday today. So let's think about Jackie's mother.
Yeah.
Today. I have a comment here from Angela. It's a question. She says it's a second generation question, that her mother is a sole survivor. And do you think she should know about her past through DNA search? She's 83 and Angela doesn't want to drum up memories and she doesn't want to talk about it. So the issue is, if you have a parent who is a child survivor today, should one, I guess, dig and should one ask more questions or should one leave it alone? So it's an interesting and difficult question. What do you think, Marie and Martin?
If I could, I would ask all the questions that I didn't ask earlier on. And I suggest to this lady that if possible, she should ask her questions, all the questions, because when her mother isn't there anymore, no questions can be asked anymore.
It's a difficult thing because often in the family dynamics, if somebody, you know, you're if you feel it that somebody doesn't want to be asked, and then you don't. And
Well,
only very recently I had an experience where a daughter wanted me to interview her father, and really was very, tried to convince the father. In the end, the father said, fine. I went to visit the person, and after 2 minutes said, I really don't want to be interviewed. So
I only can speak of myself, that I wish
course.
myself to know all the answers that I do not know, even if the mother doesn't want to speak.
Yes, yes. Martin, what do you say to this lady here about her mother?
I think in principle, the truth and knowledge is always important and should take priority. The trouble is that the truth and the knowledge you discover may be uncomfortable or maybe, frankly, really traumatic. So when you decide to excavate the past in that sort of way, you have to be prepared for the consequences, which may be extremely tough.
Yes.
But my belief is it is always better to face the truth, if at all possible.
I agree.
Thank you, Martin. And we got Jackie back. Jackie, tell us about your mother's birthday then.
Yes, it was 24th of June in 1909. She was born in Vienna.
And her name?
Elsa Spiegel. And she went very shortly after, in June of 42, she was transported to this horrible place, Malitrosine, not a holding camp. It was what we call a death camp. You either arrived in a gas van or you shot on a rifle. There was no waiting time. So it was, one can only console oneself with saying that she probably died very quickly, but what she must have gone through. She had all the pain and none of the gain. It was, and that really is a hard pill for me to swallow, knowing how we brought our children up with the love and care, and she missed out. So the family and me missed out big time. And like you say, Martin, I think when we dig into the past, we have to take the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you very, very much. I think if you have any more questions, please type them. Otherwise, I think we are coming to the end of this session. And I'd really, really like to thank the audience, but of course, most importantly, the panelists for participating today. Really very moving. And of course, I have many more questions. Please go to our website. Marie, Martin, and Jackie's photos are featured there, and their life story as well. If you want to read more about child survivors, I can really recommend Rebecca Clifford's book. I'm sure you've seen it here. It's blurred. Sorry, my background is blurred, so I can't show it to you, but it's called Survivors, which is a fascinating account of the stories of child survivors who often don't remember even their original names. And it features Jackie's story as well. If you are a child survivor and you'd like to be interviewed, please get in touch with me. Or if you're a child of child survivors and like to tell your family's story, please also get in touch with me, because Refugee Voices Archive has just recently started to interview second and third generations. So this is a new venture for us, and we can interview second and third generations. So please get in touch if you'd like to be interviewed. So just to say, have a good afternoon and hope to see you soon at one of our other events. And thank you very much for coming.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye. Thank you so much.